talking a little bit about mental illness, and I think it's we could use this as a wake-up call too. Not just uh, that we should also look at ourselves and see, you know, get ourselves, take ourselves to a checkup, yeah, get ourselves tuned up. On the res, when you say to tune somebody up, that means you beat the shit out of them, yeah. I'm gonna tune your ass up. Gay guy talk, that might mean something completely different. Huh? Shoot. Oh gosh. I mean, we take our cars in, to get tuned up. We take our bodies to the doctor to get physicals to see if we're doing okay. Our minds and our emotions are also a part of ourself. Therefore, we should get them checked out too. If you only focus on one part of the self, eventually you see you're neglecting the others. If you're not taking care totally of your mental and emotional self, you're going to go down. Yeah, you are going to go down. So when you're looking at this kind of illness, then you should look at the four parts of the self to get as best foundation as possible. Yeah, the best, most healthy foundation as possible by taking care of the four parts of yourself. Don't think that that's going to cure you, though. Yeah, no. All I'm saying is to get a foundation when dealing with any kind of disease. So what's important is stability, and you can do this by taking the care of the four parts of the self as best as you can, even if you're sick. Yeah, just do the best that you can. Nobody asks. Perfection is not required because that's an illusion. It's something that men made up to rise above others, to oppress them. So that don't worry about about the level you're at right now. Just see it as a starting platform. Yeah, that's all. And now you begin. Yeah. And so when you're giving yourself a healthy foundation, then this is going to help you in your cure. Yeah, for when you're looking for the cure for the disease you have. If you have a disease, this is going to be the best foundation for you to achieve healing. A dualistic world really creates oppression, and some of the things that sprouts into is suicide. And you have a lot of times depression involving that too. And the more dualistic we become because of our society, our Western society, the more prone we are to mental illness and emotional disorder. Those two things go along with duality amazingly. Yeah. So that's why I said when beginning healing that it's best you have to have a good starting point, and you can do something about it by taking care of yourself totally. Yeah, the four parts of yourself as best as you can, as I just said a few minutes ago, and this will help you in looking for a cure. So anyway, as I said, duality just perpetuates unhealthy living, unhealthy thought processes, imbalance of the self, where you only focus on certain parts of the self and neglect the others. And this all lays the groundwork for mental illness and emotional disorder. It's going to happen more frequent in a dualistic society than it will in a Lakota Star Knowledge based society. Because in Lakota Star Knowledge based society, we don't label things as good and evil. We don't look at perfection. We don't see weakness as bad. We see strength and weaknesses need each other. That there's a way you can use them both to maintain a healthy way of living. See, that way of seeing things, that the value of weaknesses is just as valuable as strengths. They both serve purposes. But a dualistic society will favor one over the other. See? Separation, duality. And that is like the perfect breeding ground for emotional disorders and mental illnesses to just flourish. Whereas in Lakota Star Knowledge, it's more difficult. But in Lakota Star Knowledge, we can identify it quicker and take care of it. But duality, since it nourishes mental illness and emotional disorder, it's more difficult to locate it, the root. Yeah, and therefore, it's also more difficult to deal with it as well. So that's why I said the best place to start is within you, yeah, your foundation, to try to get out of your dualistic tendencies. That's where it begins. That's where the healing begins. Yeah, and when you do that, boy, you're setting a huge thing in motion that's going to swing in your favor. And that includes in dealing with mental and emotional illnesses. Yeah. So, on the reservations today, we are incredibly dualistic. And as a result, mental illness is on the rise. Emotional disorder is on the rise. Very, very much so, especially among younger people. About several weeks ago, I heard from a friend of mine, a Lakota guy. I know him personally. He's a good guy. And he was talking about how 5 or 6 students at one of the high schools made a pact to commit suicide. And one died. One succeeded. And the parents really acted fast. And one girl got sick. So the mother really worked on her fast and saying, "What did you do?" The girl didn't want to say anything, but the mother was persistent. And the other girl said that, see, one girl already died, yeah, and she ingested certain kind of pills. And when the mother noticed that her daughter was starting to get sick in the stomach, she got suspicious. So she took her daughter to the hospital immediately. The daughter was trying to fight her. They called the cops. They subdued her. The mother said, "I think these girls made a pact." And so they got on her case and really persuaded her to give up the names of the other girls involved. And it turned out there were 6 total. One already died. So the other 5, their parents were notified immediately. So they, sent cops to the homes, and sure enough, those girls were getting sick now too. So they rushed them to the hospital and pumped them. Yeah, they pumped the stuff out of them, and now they're in counseling. They made a pact to die. Why? Was it because of bullying? Was it because of something else? And I think depression is a big factor in there, because people don't really understand what it is. But I think that was the factor. On the Pine Ridge Sioux Reservation, it seems like there's suicides almost every week. It seems to be like there's 1 or 2 that's successful every week. Look at the obituaries and you see some 14, 15-year-old kid passed on, and I'm thinking to myself, there's so many teenagers dying. It has to be suicide, and I was right. So I think there's a lot of pressure with bullying Facebooking, texting, and things like this. I think that only fuels the depression that the students already have. It just increases the level of that. It's already there. And you can't blame Facebook or WhatsApp. You can't blame those programs because the disease was already in them. And those platforms just accelerated it. I do believe that's a mental illness that's really going around. It's becoming a popular thing to commit suicide on the reservation. It's like normal. Yeah? It's unbelievable. Man, when I was a teenager, when somebody did that, that was shocking to the whole community. There was a guy that was about, I think he was a year older than me, and he quit school one time. He was a grade above me, yeah, and he quit school. He's kind of a wild party guy. And then he decided he didn't want to live like that. Yeah, he's troubled, and he doesn't want to live, taking drugs and getting drunk all the time. He's a cool guy, huh? And so he decided to come back to school. And he missed a year, so they put him in my grade. He was really a nice guy. His name was Rudy. He was a really contributing member of our class, and he got along with everybody. He didn't care if you were Indian or white. Him and I were the only boys in that school that had long hair. And the school had a lot of Indians, 70% Indians. But Rudy and I were the only ones that had long hair. We had the Indian look. Yeah? Rudy was outspoken. He was outgoing. He did his best in school. He took notes. He studied for exams. And he wanted good grades. And he was doing really good. He was doing really, really good. And you see him in the hallway, he smile, hey, how's it going, And then sometime in, I think it was April or May, beginning of May, they found him dead. He hung himself. He committed suicide. And that was shocking as hell. Never heard of that before. A high school kid doing this. And we heard of adults doing this, getting drunk, and every now and then somebody might do that. But for a high school kid, we were shocked. I was so broken up, I couldn't even go to the funeral. And I still don't believe in funerals, because to me, they're not there anymore. I'll mourn in my own way. I don't need to be in front of a bunch of people to do that. That's how it is for me. I don't believe in funerals. That's a Christian dualistic concept, and I don't believe in it. I choose to honor people and mourn privately. I don't need to make a show of it. So that's what I chose to do back then. The rest of the class, the school sent the class on the bus to the cemetery, and it was very sad. I didn't go because I didn't want to. I was too broken. And it just confused me. Why? Rudy, why? You could talk to me. Huh? Why did you do this? I would have helped you. But we didn't know about depression. The Indian people, just think of it though. Our ancestors did. Our ancestors knew about depression because we had a ceremony to deal with it. But why is it that us Indians today did not know about depression? So that's why it was tough. It was really hard to deal with. And like I said, I didn't know about depression, so it was really hard. Later on, I learned about that, and I realized, damn, that's what Rudy had. Damn, I wished I knew about depression back then. Yeah, we would have caught it, maybe, but we would have had a chance. You know what I mean? So how is it that Indians of today didn't know about depression, but yet our ancestors did? I'll tell you how that happened. Back in the late 1800s, when we were placed on reservations, there were prison camps in the beginning. And this is a situation where we couldn't leave, we were not allowed to hunt. Our knives and guns were taken from us, and we were only allowed to eat whatever the American government gave to us, which was really no good food. The quality of the food was okay when it left places like Chicago and stuff like that, but once it got to some of these train stations between there and the reservation, a lot of these handlers would sell it, and then they would buy old food and put that in there instead, and these middlemen would make a lot of money. Yeah. So what we got on a reservation was bullshit food. Yeah, it was really no good. And we ended up getting all kinds of diseases like heart diseases, hypertension, diabetes, things like that. And then at the same time, our language and ceremonies were declared illegal by the United States. So we were hit physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Soon after that, our minds became weak. And these, as I said earlier, these are the four parts of the self. So with the four parts of the self being sick, we lost our connection to our sacred center. So we started to focus on communicating away from that. And then the priests came from the various churches, and they learned our ways and said that since our ways conflict with the Bible, that our ways are evil, that they come from Satan. They come from the devil. So in our weakened states, we slowly began to accept that. Now, another thing is that there were some Lakota people that didn't want to accept that. They wanted to hang on to the traditional Lakota star knowledge ways. And if they revolted, they were sent to a mental hospital in Canton, South Dakota, which was set up for all reluctant Indians in America that did not want to become Christianized. They were sent there. And these church priests also committed the medicine men, medicine women, holy men, holy women. They committed all of them to these mental asylums too. This way, the people would not go to them for help, that they would come to the churches. They wanted the Indian people to only go to the priests and not their traditional healers. So they sent the healers to So they sent the healers to this mental asylum to die. And if you are radical, you were sent there to die too. Yeah. So while this is happening, the priests are saying to the Indian people, if you believe our way, we will help your children. And so, it was a very, very dire straits time. And so a lot of Indians became Christians because of that. Like I said, we were weak-minded too at that point. And those who stuck it out, there were people who refused to accept Christianity, but they went to church anyway. What they were doing was they were putting up a candy store front. On the outside, they were acting like good little Christian Indians, but on the inside they weren't. They were star knowledge people. Yeah? They did this because they didn't want to get sent to that mental asylum to die. That's sad, isn't it? But that's part of what happened back then. And it's because of these people who maintained this knowledge in secret. Thanks to them, they passed it down, to certain people like me, and we still have this knowledge. And I have this show, and I'm sharing it with you. Because this regards the sacred center. And we all have that. Yeah, this is not a Lakota thing. This is a Ikje Oyate thing. Ikje Oyate means human being. When you live this way, as I said in the beginning, you communicate as a human, not as a Lakota, not as a German, or a Japanese, or an African. You communicate as a human. Yeah? That's really important to know. So, that's how it was back then. Yeah? Now remember I said that the priest said to the Indians, we will help your children. So, they took the children away from the parents, sent them to boarding school hundreds of miles away, where these children were tortured to speak only English and learn the civilized Christian way. If they spoke about home, they were tortured. These schools didn't do background checks in those days. Yeah, the pay was really low, so they got really no good teachers in these schools. A lot of these teachers were sadistic. They got sexual pleasure from torturing people. And here, this is like summer holiday camp for them. And the same thing for perverts. A lot of perverts now had their pick of the litter. And they could get away with it. That's what happened. A lot of these children were murdered. They were killed. They were raped. They were molested. And there's a lot of unmarked graves near these schools. Not all these children are accounted for. So, those who made it through, what they learned was whatever they saw. Because a lot of these children never went back home. They were told by the priests that their families had died and that there was nobody there. And that broke their hearts. This is why some of these children, they were so sad they couldn't eat. And they ended up starving themselves to death. And those who made it through, like I said, they didn't really survive because they were not able to process all these emotional traumas that they experienced. They didn't know how, because the only adults that were around them were these unhealthy, abusive people, teachers, dorm matrons, cooks, janitors, priests. They were all unhealthy to them. That's all they knew. They learned how to become victims, and they learned how to become abusers to those who they considered weaker than themselves. So they didn't really survive. A lot of these children that made it through these schools, they had a lot of traumas that they didn't know how to deal with, because all they saw was abuse. That's what they learned. There was no adult healthy role models to emulate. And remember I said these children were told that their families were all dead, so they didn't go back during summer holiday. They just stayed at these schools and worked. So when they left these schools, they tried to live in mainstream America. Nobody accepted them. They would say, you're a heathen. You're a dirty Indian. So they couldn't even get jobs off the reservation. And when they went back to the reservation, to their people, they ran into more problems. Many, many times they were not even accepted by their own people because their own people were saying, "Oh, you're too white. You act like a white man." So they're caught in between. So a lot of them turned to alcohol to try to hide all of it, to try to forget everything. They turned to alcohol and then later drugs. There were some who tried to make it. They married each other because they knew each other went through the same thing. And they didn't want their children to go through what they went through. So they didn't teach them the language. They didn't teach them the culture. Those children, the children of these first generation boarding school people, those children are today's elders. When they were born, they didn't learn the language. They didn't learn Lakota Star knowledge. They never got the opportunity to. When you look at an old person on the reservation today, they're not the connection to the ancient past. No, they were born in a Christian background at a time when the reservations were strongly Christian. So this is what happened. That's a native experience that a lot of people don't realize. This is what happened all over America and Canada too. So the next generation, they are sent to boarding school too. No choice. It's a little bit better, but they're still abused. They're still getting treated really no good. And so they grow up, have children, and they don't teach their children anything. What can they teach them? They don't know anything concerning their own language. This is why today most people cannot speak their own language, and what little cultural information they know is Christianized, meaning it's dualistic, and it's not the original ancient form. Okay, so the first generation of Indian kids that were sent to boarding school, since all around them were unhealthy adults who did nothing but abuse them, they didn't receive healthy parenting. They missed things that they should have learned about life. So they're lacking emotional development. So when they grow up, and those who make it through these boarding schools and then they have children, those children are also lacking that emotional support, that emotional development, because the parents don't know how to do it. Yeah, all they knew and all they learned was abuse. All they experienced in these schools was abuse. So they have a hard time trying to be a healthy parent. So they do the best that they can. But the children still are not receiving the proper emotional development, the experiences that healthy children should receive from healthy parents. They're still missing that. And so when that second generation grows up, they know even less concerning healthy parenting. And so their children receive even less. And every time this happens, the next generation becomes more dualistic than the previous one. So let me try to say that again. The first generation boarding school kids, they didn't receive proper parenting skills. So when they have children, their children are not receiving healthy training that they should be receiving. They're receiving even less than their parents. Now that second generation, when they grow up, see, they know even less. So when they have children, those children are are receiving even less, and it gets worse with each generation, which also means that the less healthy emotional development they receive, the more dualistic they become. So with each generation is more becoming emotionally underdeveloped, they're also becoming more dualistic. So today, it's a huge mess on the reservation. We're incredibly, as a whole, we're incredibly underdeveloped emotionally, and we are incredibly dualistic. We're quick to attack each other. We're quick to pull each other down. We're just like the rest of the civilized, dualistic world. Notice I didn't say white man, because this is all over the world. It's not just among white countries. It's all over the world. Wherever there is a dualistic ideology, where one gender is considered less than and property of the other gender, you're going to have incredibly underdeveloped emotional people, which equals incredibly dualistic people. And that is unhealthy. So that started by the time of the late 1800s on the reservation. And that sets up the breeding ground for mental illnesses to flourish among our society now, on the reservation. So, this personality disorders started to come to the forefront, and people, taking into consideration other things as well. This really created a disaster area for our people. So I think what we need to do is we need to become aware, knowledgeable